Hello and welcome to aidbees, everybody. This is another exciting, insightful podcast. I'm your host, Ashutosh, with you. And today we have a really eminent personality from the development sector. We have Ms. Ruchika Bahl joining us straight away from Bangladesh. Ruchika, welcome to aidbees and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, aidbees, and thank you, Ashutosh. I'm happy to be here.
We're really happy to have you here as well. Today, we're going to talk about the question of social impact. What social impact means, where does social economic development for communities, especially underprivileged communities, lie, and how do we navigate through peace, empathy, and harmonization of communities through these economic development questions. So we're really excited to talk to you, Ruchika. But before that, for our audience and for everybody watching this podcast, I would like to give a quick introduction. Ruchika has been a development practitioner since the last 27 plus years. That's actually older than how old I am. So it's really great to be learning and taking inspiration from somebody as motivating as you. She's a British Chevening and J. and Tata scholar. She's also a Rotary priest and HEVOS fellow and a UNV and BSO volunteer. Ruchika is a London School of Economics alumni, and she's been working with UN agencies across her varied and multiple years and layers of experience. She's worked in continents of Asia and Africa, specifically on social development and socio-economic concerns of communities. She's also worked with refugee communities, multiple international agencies that you worked with. Ruchika is also a Tata School of Social Sciences alumni. And I am really excited to speak with you, and I'm really excited to start this conversation off. How are you feeling being here?
Thank you, and I'm feeling really nice, and thanks for making me feel really aged. I didn't realize that 27 was actually a really big, large number. I'm speaking to somebody super young. But yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and I'm also excited to, have this discourse with the 8Bs, which I think is doing very exciting and very different work, much needed work in today's trying and stressful and not so happy times. So thank you for organizing this.
Absolutely. And I think it's always a learning and collaborative effort, being together and discussing these important issues. As you said, as I also informed our audiences about social impact, right? So let's start the conversation and directly jump into what you think the definition of the social impact with regards to the social economic development is, Ruchika. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, now I think the word social impact per se is fairly nebulous. No, it has different connotations. It can have different interpretations. Um, as as development activists or as development practitioners, we do work very consciously on social change programs. We work on social development, and the whole objective and the aspiration behind all those interventions and all those programs is to essentially ensure capacity or within a certain community or within a certain society so that they can really be full citizens in their countries, in their societies, which means that they have the agency, they are empowered, they can take their own decisions, and they play a role and participate in decision making as well. So, I mean, those are essentially the criteria that we typically use when we are talking about social development. But I think today in this very globalized world, there are no watertight definitions of social development, economic development, political development. It's development at the end of the day. And why do we undertake these programs? We undertake these programs because even in today's day and age, there are communities that are vulnerable. There are communities that are marginalized due to various reasons, whether it is due to gender or whether it is due to their ethnic identity, race, class, caste, you name it. I mean, those stratifications have continued. And by the virtue of those stratifications, certain communities are suffering. They're not being able to enjoy the equal benefits of economic development of their particular countries. So that's why I feel that social development and economic development are two sides of the same coin. You can't talk about one without addressing the other. And let me give you an example. In today's day and age, the classic argument or the classic statement that is made by the countries is, oh, well, look at the economic growth, look at the GDP, we are growing at 7%, we are growing at 6%. The question is, how inclusive is this economic growth? How many jobs is this economic growth creating? How much is the difference of inequality between the rich and the poor? We see these Gini coefficients, which are really the classic revelation of inequality in society, is only increasing by the day. So you can have an economy, you can have a country that is galloping in the world on economic terms, but there are no jobs getting created. Socially, people are still suffering. There are still social conflicts happening. The poor are getting poorer, and hence it has no value. So I think that's why when we talk about impact, development impact has to be measured both socially and economically, and interventions have to happen at the same time and are pretty interrelated.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. Um, I totally agree with you, Ruchika, on the fact that social impact largely is the second side of the coin of economic development. So, when we talk about socio-economic development in that sense, and given the societies in third world countries and even the continents that you worked around in your experience, do you think this socio-economic development is fairly distributed? And if not so, what are the reasons that you can maybe underline?
Well, certainly it's not well distributed, because if it were, we wouldn't be in the world of wars and conflicts that we see happening all around us, right? So I think the challenge is this, that of course you have governments who are aspiring. We would like to believe they're aspiring and they have noble intentions of ensuring the right economic policies, so that they form or contribute to inclusive societies, and that's why their people are able to succeed, etc. But at the same time, in this globalized world, I think all of us are fairly connected with each other. So the economic policies that are designed and drafted in Europe have a direct impact on the economic development in Africa. Just to give you an example. So let me give you a really small anecdote, which has remained with me for several years. On one of my missions and visits to the Ivory Coast in West Africa, in Côte d'Ivoire, I was in the capital of the city, Abidjan, and I was really excited. And I said, look, I've always read about it in textbooks and school books and literature about how Ivory Coast is the largest cocoa producing country in the world. So let me go buy some local chocolates which are made with cocoa here. And you won't believe it, I couldn't find a simple, regular local chocolate made in that country, because everything that was available there was French and everything that was available there was European. So the power of the power of the first world, if I may so say, till date, to continue to extract, to continue to exploit these nations, taking away their minerals, taking away their resources with the raw materials, doing the value addition in their countries. So the job creation, the employment, everything is happening in France, but then the finished product comes back to that same country at a much extrapolated price to be sold. So the point I'm trying to make here today is that economic policies have to be designed and have to be interpreted within the context of not just the national existence and national problems and national issues, but have to be seen in a global context. And none of us are disconnected in this globalized world. And when globalization happened, we were all really excited because it brought the world together. But I think it's only now that we're beginning to see the impact, which has not been so good, of these LPG. We say LPG stands for liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Correct. So the impact of LPG on today's communities, on today's societies, is immense. And hence, economic policies, while attempting to have, I think, a fair goal of economic development for all, are failing because they are pretty myopic. Now, also within economic policies, there is a huge gamut. We have the fiscal policies, we have the monetary policies, we have the macroeconomic policies, and we have labor policies. Yeah. And all of these have to be intertwined and interlinked if we really need to create the right kind of social impact change that you're alluding to. And I think that is where we tend to fail, because not necessarily everything works in a synchronized and in a well-coordinated manner.
Absolutely. And I think it's also much more related to how the hegemonization of the LPG system has also come into picture, right? Because the stronger countries will always drain the brains from the weaker countries in that sense. And it also does lead to a lot of disruption within the societal thread of these countries, right? Because and that's where the question of, I think, the question of people largely and people being peacefully coexisting comes into picture. I think social impact can not only just, as you said, it's the other side of the coin within economic development as well. So, and I totally agree on the fact that there is an unequal distribution, there is an unfair distribution to this. In your experience, when you come to think of such developmental policies between the powerful countries or maybe the first and third world countries in that regard, where do you place peace and harmony within this sort of development? Like, where do you think these policies act on the general public to maintain peace and harmony?
I mean, I think peace and harmony is the core purpose of society and civilization, right? If we don't live harmoniously, and if there's no cooperation and there's constant conflict and war happening, it's not desirable. So I'm not sure how that would respond from a global to a national level. I think every country, every district, every locality has its mandate of ensuring peace and harmony between the diverse communities that stay or inhabit that space. Now, even within you have heterogeneous societies, with multiple, with a lot of diversity of the communities that are existing there. But at times you also have rather homogeneous societies, which would be a certain community, but then even within that certain community, you would have different variations by the virtue of, either them being indigenous or them being a different religion, etc. So I think what is crucial is that to instill and to take forward peace and harmony, there has to be that conscious effort on the parts of the community to live together. Now, whether that comes from some dictated mandates of national laws and national agendas, etc., that's one thing. But inherently, I think as human beings, it's important to have that value and to have that desire to be able to coexist with the other.
Right.
And today, the other is becoming even more significant and is becoming even more of an outsider. Right? And the other can be anyone. The other is the migrant who has come into your country and is serving your lower skill needs, because your own country people don't want to undertake those tasks, which is what we typically see in the Middle East to a large extent. We have this huge migrations happening of women and men to work in low skilled sectors, to work in the domestic sector, etc. And the significant other, or the big other, is also the refugee who has come into your country because he or she is stateless due to a war or due to a conflict that is taking place due to certain other larger global issues. So you have the Ukraine war, you have the crisis that is happening in the Palestine-Israel region. You have, in Bangladesh, we have the whole Rohingya refugees escaping from Myanmar and coming into Bangladesh because they're really running for their lives now with all the shootings and the firings that are happening. So will this other, who also contributes in their own way, small or big, to the extent they're allowed to the economics of the society, whether informally or formally, is still the outsider, you see? And I think today that's where the challenge lies, because there is a lack of tolerance and there is non-acceptance of this other. Now, when we had the war in 1948 with the Palestinians, a lot of the Palestinians left the region and went into Jordan, went into Lebanon, and those countries accepted them. In fact, Jordan has today, its landmark that it's the only country where the Palestinians have got naturalized. And at that time, everybody was open because they were similar people, they were Arabs, and there was that level of acceptance. But today, nobody even wants to go that further. So I
Right.
think the barriers and the walls in our minds and are in our hearts and in our societies are even more stronger.
Absolutely, I really agree with that in the sense that these become loopholes in a manner after a point in socio-economic development policies, as you also already mentioned. I mean, I was thinking of all those points in my head in terms of refugee crisis, in terms of the majority minority population coming in together, in terms of how these people who are largely outsiders, they contribute to a certain sense of economic impact as well, right? And this might not be seen as something so peaceful by the majority communities always. Maybe this might be seen as a threat on them for the socio-economic development. And largely because I was reading about your experience and I was reading about your work as well. You've worked a lot on refugee crisis and refugee communities around, specifically the Rohingya community. When you look at all these aspects of majorities and acting to minorities coming to their countries, or even development happening through a lens of these small economic sort of contributions, how do you as a development practitioner weigh it or salvage these priorities? Like, where do you think the priorities lie here? Is it economic development of the country largely, or is it totally towards, okay, these are refugees that have come out to our country and maybe we need to create a better world for them?
No, I don't think anything is so simple and black and white. Huh?
Yeah, I would like to know more on that from you.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not black and white. So you have a you have a certain community that is being persecuted in its home country, that is escaping and coming into a host country like Bangladesh. And the reason why they're coming into Bangladesh is because ethnically and racially and religiously they're the same. Right? And Bangladesh is next door, which is not to say that they're not traveling. They're also going into other countries, to Indonesia, to India, to, wherever they can, because they're basically fleeing persecution. Now you have Bangladesh. In 2017, when the mass exodus happened out of Myanmar, Bangladeshis were the only country that welcomed the Rohingyas with open arms. And, they were really very hospitable. They were ready to host this huge community that arrived. And a huge area of land was given to them. Camps were set up. But all with the understanding that, they were being persecuted, they were fleeing, and they need refuge and they need a home, which is going to be temporary. Now, Bangladesh in itself is a developing country. It's an LDC, and majority of the labor force of Bangladesh, due to the want of jobs in the country which are missing, is also migrating as migrant labor force into other parts of the world, primarily the UAE and the Middle East. I mean, the UAE, the Middle East. Now, 2019, 2017, everything is fine. There's peace, there's harmony between the host and the host community and the refugees. And frankly speaking, there's also been a really good history between the Bangladeshis and the Myanmari Rohingyas, where they would come, they would be contracted, there was mobility. They are great fishermen. Rohingyas are great fishermen. So the rich Bangladeshi boatsmen would hire them, their services to go and, fish and bring the produce, etc. So there were economic transactions that were constantly happening between these two communities, and there was harmony. So 2017 to 2019, everything is hunky-dory. There's still that, peace and harmony as you describe it. But then in 2019, 2020, the global pandemic happens. And the entire Bangladeshi workforce that was employed in the Middle East is forcibly sent back to their home countries. And they come back jobless. They are looking for jobs. They are, looking for economic opportunities. And that's when the grudges and the not so happy situation starts, because they start believing that, look at this refugee community, which is being well taken care of in their minds, is being well taken care of by the humanitarian agencies. But we are jobless. We still don't have, anything to eat. We are not getting the same facilities vis-a-vis health and food security that the refugees are getting. And that's from there starts the discontent.
Right.
Now, what do? You both are right. You need to protect one community because it's a human rights issue. But at the same time, you can't ignore the local communities who belong here, and they're equally right and justified in saying we also want economic opportunities. We also want food to eat. We also want good medical services. We also want health benefits. So I think that is the tricky line. And what we say, working within this paradigm of the HPD, or the Humanitarian Peace Development Nexus, because the principle of do no harm has to apply to both communities, and you cannot favor one community over the other community. Now, Cox's Bazar is an example in itself, because it's hosting one of the largest refugee camps in Asia. In South Asia, and we have close to approximately 1.3 million refugees here, and they are literally 3 times the size of the host community population in Cox's Bazar, and Cox's Bazar is also one of the poorest districts of Bangladesh. Now, one could argue that, okay, yes, look, when this whole crisis started, at least the development partners and the development agencies have now realized that they also need to invest in the host community of Cox's Bazar.
Right.
But why did it have to reach this stage? You see, I mean, it should have been on the priority agenda of the national government for many years back. But for us, I think working with both the communities, ensuring that rights there is a win-win that we can create is what is, I think, always the objective.
That was going to be my next question, actually. That was going to be my, because whenever we were saying that there's a host community and there's a refugee community, and of course, both have their economic and livelihood demands separately and even maybe interlinking with each other. How do you come to solutions which can help the both of them and not create an impasse? Because as a country that's hosting refugees, or as a country that's even giving some provisions for refugees, it becomes very difficult for me to create policies that can also align with what my residents are asking or speaking for, like in the example of UAE and Bangladesh, as you said. So how do you come to solutions? Do you have any sort of experiences where there was maybe a hardship coming to a solution for the both of them?
Yeah, I mean, every country and every context is different. So, for instance, a refugee hosting country like Lebanon has a very different way of approaching things. A refugee hosting country like Jordan has a very different way of looking at things, or Turkey. Now, in Bangladesh, there is a challenge we are up against where the refugees do not have a right to work. And it's not even because the understanding is here that they are basically here temporarily, and they will be repatriated back to Myanmar once the conditions are fine for them to go back. But it's very clear on all sides that it's going to be voluntary repatriation, and nobody is going to be forced to go back into a death knell, right? So what do you really do in a situation like this, where there are limited resources and at the same time you have a host community that's not happy, there are no jobs there? So I think what we are doing, some of the solutions that we are working with is on how do we enhance the employment and the employability aspects of the host community. So how do you ensure that there are more skills programs that are speaking to the labor market demands of the local communities? And by that, I mean, the entire gamut. So we are also having to deal with concerns around women's participation, for instance. So for instance, Cox's Bazar is a very conservative, socio-culturally orthodox society where women do not participate in formal markets, but they are the highest in the informal markets. So how do we, work around those issues is also something that we are paying attention to. But something that we are working on now, and I was telling you this earlier within this humanitarian development nexus, is to see how both communities can benefit, interact, and interconnect with each other, which will actually then contribute to more social cohesion in the society. So one
Right.
example I can share with you that we are working on is how do the local farmers or how do the local producers of Cox's Bazar, now Cox's Bazar is largely an agrarian society because farming is the biggest stronghold here, and these are small smallholder farmers. It's largely subsistence farming, and then whatever is produced is then sold into the market as an extra earning. So how do we enhance the capacities and the skills of the local producers and local farming community to be able to produce more? And then how does that some of the produce get sold into the refugee markets, right? Because there is a huge demand for fresh produce and for food within the refugee market. And of course, informal tradings happen, but how do you formalize it so that the Bangladeshi producers, the Bangladeshi farmers are able to sell their products into to the retailers who are supplying these products into the refugee camps. Now, once that happens, and then the host community begins to see the economic value, you have in a way contributed to creating a win-win situation and also incentivizing the camp markets as an economic of economic value to the host community. Now this is work in progress, right? It's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, overnight the farming community cannot produce excess when they're basically just been, they don't have the right capacities or the skills or the tools or the the mechanization that is required to produce at a large scale. So these are slow processes and they take time. And that is where people begin to lose patience because they want to see overnight, they want to see tangible results. And that's not always easy. But these are some of the interventions that we take forward to see how we can actually contribute to building social cohesions, changing perceptions between the two communities, so that there is that level of acceptance and harmony that can be generated.
Right. And I think largely the aspect of empathy and understanding that, okay, this is also a fellow community to me. And this is also a community that requires or maybe needs certain resources. And I think this happens from both ends, right? This collaborative effort to maintain peace and to maintain harmony while you're talking about economic decisions, like even, for example, giving jobs or even, for example, distributing the agrarian product. There, I think this peace and empathy largely creates a lot of what do you say, collaboration, or even like even an equal playing ground for that matter. What do you think on that? Like, how do local communities, or maybe how do these two communities collaborate or react to this sort of collaboration?
Empathetic ethics is a very I think it's an aspirational value, and I think the whole development paradigm rests on empathetic ethics, right? It's just to say, put yourself in the other person's shoes to see what he or she is experiencing, and then you'll be able to contribute to making their life better. Now, I think this is a great ideological concept, and it should really be the reference point or the benchmark. But when you are hungry and you are dying and you do not have enough to eat, the likelihood of you having any empathy to the outsider or to a person that you believe doesn't need to be in your space is going to be negligible, minimal, or non-existent. So I'm not sure how in the practical realistic world of challenges and concerns, empathy plays out between communities or between people. On the contrary, I feel that this is eroding. This value seems to be eroding because there is a lot of impatience with anybody who is alien. I think globally, xenophobia is gaining more ground. And it's a bit of a interesting paradox, Ashutosh, because, today, as I was saying, in this globalized world, everybody is pretty global, right? Everybody's traveling. Well, majority is traveling who have the means. Food, culture, art, which are, great transmitters of acknowledging a different society or a different set of norms are being explored, are being talked about. Food largely being the one everybody seems to be enjoying, different cuisines, etc. But how much of it is actually in being utilized to accept that person to share the benefits of development is, I think, is still a question mark, or at least I don't have an answer to that. And I find that it's becoming even more difficult because boundaries are getting more harder and more stronger. And negotiations, bringing communities together is becoming an uphill task. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think it's also because of the increasing xenophobia, as you mentioned, or this idea that, okay, there's this much or a limited amount of development to be happening, or limited amount of steps to be taken, and who gets to take those steps, or who gets to even reap the benefit of those steps. But I do think that, as you said, that it is surely the feeling of empathy might be eroding, or the feeling of kindness, for that matter, might be eroding. But I just wanted to understand from you maybe some ways from your personal experience where it could be inculcated within these communities. Maybe it could be taught to both the sides, maybe the host and the refugees for that matter, and even
Yeah.
other aspects of policymakers,
Yeah.
that maybe, empathy and peace building or harmonization through kindness is something that should lead people to a better society, right? What are your thoughts on that,
Yeah.
where policymakers can maybe take steps to make people learn about it?
No, I completely agree. And I think first and foremost is political will. So when there is that message coming from the highest authority in the country, I
Hmm.
think it has a real role to play, right? Because there is a political will on the part of the ruling party or on part of the ruling government to be very clear that, any kind of anti certain community sentiment will not be encouraged, will not be inculcated. The spirit of pluralism, the spirit of diversity has to come from the highest quarters. And then, of course, it has to get translated into norms and laws. Now, you need to also have laws to govern it. Suppose, somebody were to go and do XYZ to a different community member, there have to be laws to protect that person who has been harmed. So I think the legal normative infrastructure needs to come from a strong political will. And at the same time, as you're talking about education, and that's also something that, there's been a lot of investments that have been happening across the board in different parts of the world on the right kind of narratives and texts that need to be included in the education systems. For instance, even for the kind of work that we are doing with the host community in Cox's Bazar, and we're investing a lot on skills developments. Now, these are practical training, skill development programs around for the host community, like construction, plumbing, etc. But even within that training package, we are including modules of social cohesion. So what does it mean for a trainer to be conducting a training where there's diversity in his or her group? Or what would they need to explain to their trainees that, they need to behave in a certain fashion in the kind of context that they're operating? So I think there are initiatives, but those can only be taken so far unless and until there is support to invest in them from the highest national authorities. So certainly, I think empathy can be learned. It doesn't necessarily have to come. It's not something that you're born with. It's certainly an attitude, a behavior, and a value that can be learned. And of course, orientation to it should come from schools and spaces of learning. So certainly.
Right, and I think we definitely agree on this. And I was really thinking of so many things while you were talking about this, because largely, if you teach empathy, or largely if even if policymakers give value to empathy and harmonization together, it can lead to better ways of making the policy, at least. And then you depend on education, then you depend on learning so far so long. And of course, because all the larger peace building communication that happens, all the larger peace building, even initiatives that are happening around, they start with this intervention that peace needs to be maintained and empathy needs to be maintained, right? Within communities itself, regardless of who's who or regardless
Yeah.
of who's coming and who's going. Um, and it is really wonderful to also think about how economic or socio-economic perspectives relate to this, because I feel like it gives birth to so many discourses around. Uh, Now, this outsider that you're talking about, and even when we also talked about this in the beginning, that there is a brain drain situation, there is an outsider and there is an insider. While maintaining peace between these, or while creating policies between these, uh, are there ways that, and I know it might sound a little absurd to ask here, but are there ways to sort of communicate this to the outsider and the insider, that okay, we have policy based solutions for you, and those policy based solutions can only work when you support us? Because largely what I've seen around across communities, even for that matter refugees, is that there's a lot of unsurety, there's a lot of no there's a lot of vagueness with regards to how policies get delivered to the host community or to refugees. Do you think there's a way to tell these people?
I think if I understand your question correctly, I think things are always a little more you're always a little more in control when you're working with the host community, right? Because you're working within a system, you're working within a certain framework, you know what you're saying has a certain reference point and a backing. Now, when you're dealing with a refugee community who is basically living on the hope that one day they will be allowed to, or they will leave towards, better opportunities. They're really relying on hope. And there are geopolitical dynamics, and there are larger international considerations that are at play. As a development practitioner, you are also fairly limited in what you can commit and what hopes you can give, right?
Right.
So I think that is always the tricky part, because while you are committed as a humanitarian worker to ensuring the life and the human rights protection of the refugee, making sure that he or she is getting, has food security and is getting the right health support they need. And at your end, you're trying your level best to ensure that either they get repatriated or they get relocated to a country that's willing to accept them. You are working with a fair set of uncertainties, because your actions are not dependent on what you do or think. They're dependent on geopolitics, as I said, and international conversations and international negotiations and treaties that are being drawn up. So I don't know if I responded to your question, but it's a very different way of approaching things when you're with these two different communities.
Absolutely, you certainly have. And it's been wonderful discussing social impact, socio-economic development, largely also from the perspective of multiple communities and the aspects of peace building, harmony that we've discussed so far. Before I close this discussion, Ruchika, my last question to you would be, maybe if you could give us 2 to 3 bullet points on how can this socio-economic development be maximized, quick and easy.
I think I'll go back to what I started off with. So I think it's come full circle. So I don't think we can, to make socioeconomic development successful, we certainly need to have voices and representations of the people that we are talking about, right? So like in the UN, we say that there are the five P's of development. People, so nothing without people, for people, with people. The planet, it has to be sustainable. So anything that we do together, we have to make sure that it's sustainable. The planet is taken care of. Partnerships across board with stakeholders. Peace, and which was the fifth one? Peace, partnerships, people, planet, and shared prosperity. Now, all these basically 5 P's, as we talk about, are the cornerstone of the 17 SDGs, which are not supposed to operate in silos or as solo goals, but
Right.
come together, intertwined, and operating together within a certain framework to measure these 5 Ps, to take these 5 Ps forward. And I think if you were to deconstruct it and break it down, it comes down to exactly what I was saying, that people's voices, representation, participation is really crucial. Otherwise, without those, it's a hollow exercise.
Absolutely. And these 5 Ps is, I think, what we're leaving the audiences with to ponder upon. Another 6 P, pondering upon these Ps. So it has been a wonderful discussion, and it has been really insightful to learn so many new things about socio-economic development. And as you were mentioning the 17 SGDs and the UN development goals, I just wanted to inform our audiences as well, to you as well, that aidbees works with over 150 NGOs who largely work on these 17 SGDs, on these sustainable development goals, where we try to make not just socio-economic development, but largely we try to make a society that is based on kindness, empathy, and that cares for everyone who needs and deserves that care. So it has been a wonderful time discussing these issues with you, Ruchika, and I'm really glad that you could make time for us. And thank you so much for joining in. And I would also like to thank everybody watching in here. We will see you for another podcast very, very soon with another guest and with a lot more aspects of social impact and kindness. Till then, keep watching and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Bye bye, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you, aidbees.